Have you ever woken up one morning and realized your entire life was gone, not slowly, not gently, but all at once like someone flipping off a light switch? I did. I was 73 years old when my husband looked at me across the kitchen table and said, in the calmest voice, "I want a divorce." Just like that, no shaking hands, no regret. Just a sip of coffee after, as if he had asked me to pass the salt. I remember staring at the steam rising from his cup and thinking, ha ha ha, this must be some kind of bad joke. It wasn't. He had already spoken to a lawyer. The papers were ready, the house was in his name, the car too. I signed where they told me to sign because my hands would not stop trembling and my chest felt tight, like someone had tied a rope around it and pulled. 41 years of marriage folded into a manila envelope. Sigh, I kept thinking, surely he will soften, surely he will say he's angry and doesn't mean it. But instead, 3 weeks later, I was packing my clothes into 2 old suitcases while his new girlfriend stood in the driveway pretending to look at her phone. I wish I could say I left with dignity, but I didn't. I left with red eyes and swollen hands and a silence that hurt more than shouting would have the judge said the settlement was fair. Fair, that word still makes me laugh in a dry way. Ha ha ha, fair meant I received a small amount of money that barely covered a few months of rent. Fair meant the car I had helped pay for belonged to him because his name was on the title. Fair meant I was 73 and starting over with nothing but a prepaid phone and a suitcase full of clothes that suddenly felt too heavy. I couldn't afford an apartment. Every place required deposits and proof of income. I had none, my savings were small and legal fees had swallowed most of it, so I did what I never imagined I would do. I moved into my car, a faded blue sedan that smelled faintly of old air freshener and dust. The back seat became my bed. I folded blankets carefully each night like I was preparing a guest room instead of a place to cry in the dark the first night I slept there. I told myself it was temporary. Just a few days. Maybe a week. I parked near a grocery store because it had lights and security cameras. I remember watching families walk in and out with carts full of food while I sat behind tinted windows pretending not to exist. I kept the windows cracked for air. The night was cold, my knee ached, and somewhere around midnight I started weeping quietly so no one would hear, not loud sobbing. Just that steady, soft crying that comes when your heart finally understands what your mind has been denying. I kept hearing his voice in my head. Nobody needs you at this age. He had laughed when he said it. Laughed. Like I was an old coat he had outgrown. I can still hear it sometimes. That laugh, it wasn't loud, it was small and sharp and cruel. You know what hurts the most at that age? It's not losing money, it's losing usefulness. When someone makes you feel invisible, I had cooked his meals, ironed his shirts, sat beside him in hospitals when he was sick, and in the end he reduced me to a sentence. Nobody needs you. I started believing it. I stopped calling friends because I didn't want to explain why I wasn't home. I avoided mirrors because I didn't want to see the woman who had been discarded. I ate cheap sandwiches from the deli counter and stretched every dollar. I counted coins, 73 years old and counting coins in the driver's seat of a car. Ha ha ha, if someone had told me this would be my life, I would have said they were insane days turned into weeks. The money grew thinner. Gas became a calculation. Should I run the engine for warmth or save fuel? I found a small church parking lot where no one asked questions. Sometimes I watched the sunrise through the windshield and felt something strange, not hope exactly, but stubbornness. A quiet voice inside me saying, "You are still here, you are not finished." But then evening would come again and the loneliness would wrap around me like a heavy coat. I missed simple things, a real bed. A shower that wasn't in a public restroom, the sound of a television in the background, the feeling of belonging somewhere. All belonging, that word felt far away. One afternoon, I was sitting in the driver's seat reading an old magazine someone had left on a bench when I noticed a man in a dark suit walking slowly across the parking lot. He looked out of place, too polished, too deliberate. He wasn't carrying groceries. He wasn't heading toward the store. He was looking around, scanning faces, scanning cars. My heart began to beat faster. At my age, when something unusual happens, you assume it's bad news. Maybe someone complaining I shouldn't be parked there. Maybe security asking questions I didn't have answers for. I lowered my head, pretending not to notice him. But then he stopped near my window. I felt his shadow before I heard his knock. A soft, polite knock on the glass. I rolled the window down just a little. "Yes," my voice sounded smaller than I intended. He studied me carefully and then said words I will never forget. "Ma'am, are you Dorothy May?" My breath caught in my throat. Very few people used my full name anymore. I nodded slowly. He adjusted his tie almost nervously and said, "I've been looking for you for quite some time." My mind raced. Looking for me? Why? I had no debts, no family disputes, nothing left worth searching for. I felt fear first. Then confusion, then something else, something I couldn't quite name. The man cleared his throat gently and said, "I'm an estate attorney. I have important information regarding your first husband." My first husband. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in decades. I thought he had died long ago. I thought that chapter had closed forever. The parking lot suddenly felt too small, too quiet, the air seemed heavy. I swallowed hard and whispered, "What about him?" The man looked at me with careful eyes and said, "There has been a development, and it concerns you directly." Right there, sitting in my car with a half-empty water bottle and blankets in the back seat, my life shifted again. I didn't know it yet, I didn't understand what was coming, but I felt it. That strange, electric feeling that something impossible was about to unfold. I had lost everything. I believed I was forgotten. I believed no one needed me. And yet here was a man in a suit standing beside my car, telling me he had been searching for me. If you think that was the most shocking part, it wasn't. Because what he said next made my hands shake in a way they never had before. What would you do if, after weeks of sleeping in your car, someone told you your past wasn't what you thought it was? I remember staring at that man as if he had just spoken another language, an estate attorney, important information. My first husband, my mind tried to connect the words, but they refused to sit together properly. I whispered, "My first husband passed away almost 50 years ago." My voice cracked a little on the word passed. I had mourned him. I had cried for him, I had stood at what I believed was his funeral and tried to learn how to breathe again without him. The lawyer shook his head slowly, almost gently. "Ma'am, that's not entirely accurate." I actually laughed. Not a happy laugh, a confused, sharp little sound. "Ha ha ha, not accurate," I said. "Young man, I buried him in my heart decades ago. I know what happened." He glanced around the parking lot, then back at me. "May I speak with you somewhere more comfortable?" Comfortable. That word almost made me smile. I gestured to the passenger seat. "This is as comfortable as it gets." He hesitated, then carefully opened the door and sat down, placing a leather briefcase on his lap. He introduced himself properly this time. Calm voice, polite, professional. He said he represented the estate of Robert James Caldwell. Hearing that full name again felt like someone opening an old door inside my chest. Robert. My Robert, the man who used to bring me wildflowers because he couldn't afford roses. The man I believed had died suddenly. The lawyer spoke slowly, as if he knew every word would hit hard. "Your husband did not die in 1974. I felt my fingers tighten around the steering wheel. "That's impossible." He inhaled. "He disappeared under financial pressure. He relocated under a modified name. He rebuilt his life. And he passed away last year." I just stared at him. My ears rang. The world outside the windshield looked blurry. For a moment I honestly wondered if I was dreaming inside that car. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not possible." But he continued, gently laying out documents from his briefcase, official papers, death certificate from another state, legal filings, photographs of an older man who looked strangely familiar. Older, yes. Thinner, but the eyes, oh, the eyes were the same. I felt tears well up before I could stop them, not loud sobbing. Just that quiet, steady weeping that comes when your entire past rearranges itself. He explained that Robert had built a business over the years. Investments, property, timber, he said. I barely heard the details. My mind was stuck on one question. Why? Why would a man let the woman he loved believe he was dead? Why would he leave without a word? The lawyer seemed to read that question in my silence. He expressed regret in his later years, he said softly. "He wrote about you." My heart twisted at that. Wrote about me, after all that time. "Ha ha ha, what kind of story was this? Some twisted joke?" I shook my head slowly. "Why are you telling me this now?" That's when he paused. That's when his expression shifted slightly. "Because," he said carefully, "you are the primary beneficiary of his estate." I blinked at him. "What does that mean?" he answered in the same calm tone. "It means he left you everything." I felt a strange numbness spread through me. Everything, I had nothing. I was sleeping in a car. Everything sounded like a fairy tale word. I almost expected him to smile and say he was kidding. Instead, he opened a folder and turned it toward me. There it was in black ink, a number so large my brain refused to process it. $47 million. I stared at the number for a long time. 47 million. My mouth went dry. That can't be real," he nodded. "It is." I began shaking my head slowly like a stubborn child. "No, you must have the wrong person. I'm 73, I live in my car." I actually gestured behind me at the blankets. Ha ha ha, as if the blankets proved anything. He gave me a look that was not pity but something close to concern. "We confirmed your identity through multiple records, marriage certificate, social security. You are Dorothy May Caldwell." Hearing my old last name again made my chest tight. Caldwell, I had dropped that name after remarrying. I had tried to bury it with the past. And yet here it was again, rising like something unfinished. The number kept echoing in my head. 47 million. I tried to imagine it physically. Stacks of money filling the back seat. It felt ridiculous. I had counted quarters for gas 2 nights ago. I had chosen between buying soup or filling the tank. And now this man was calmly telling me I was one of the wealthiest women in the parking lot, maybe in the entire city. I laughed again. A shaky laugh this time. "If this is a prank, it's not funny." He didn't laugh, he simply said, "There is one condition. There it was, the air shifted again. Of course there was, nothing in my life had ever been simple. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and tried to steady my breathing. What kind of condition? He closed the folder gently and looked directly at me. In order to receive the estate, you must appear in probate court within 60 days and formally confirm your identity as his lawful spouse at the time of his disappearance. I frowned slightly. That's it, he hesitated. That hesitation made my stomach drop. There may be opposition. Opposition, the word felt heavy. From who? I asked quietly. He paused for a second longer than I liked. Your husband had a daughter. I felt my heartbeat in my ears again. A daughter, that meant a life, another family, years I knew nothing about. She was not named in the will, he continued carefully. But she has been notified of the estate. The parking lot suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. The story wasn't simple. It wasn't just money falling from the sky. There were layers, complications, conflict. My head felt light. I leaned back in the driver's seat and stared at the ceiling of the car. 73 years old and life was still surprising me. I should have felt joy. Instead, I felt overwhelmed, angry, confused, hurt. He wasn't dead. He left. He lived. He had a daughter. And now he was gone for real, leaving behind millions and a condition that would pull me into a courtroom battle. I swallowed slowly and looked at the lawyer again. What happens if I don't go? He answered honestly. Then the estate will move into contested distribution and the inheritance could shift away from you. $47 million, the man who had laughed at me, the nights in my car. The words, nobody needs you. All of it rushed through me at once. I could walk away, I could refuse, I could stay in my car and pretend none of this was happening, or I could stand up, for the first time in a long time. My hand stopped shaking, not completely, but enough. I looked at him steadily and asked the one question that mattered. When do we leave? He gave a small nod as if he had expected that answer. But what I didn't know yet was that this condition was only the beginning, because someone else had already decided that money belonged to them, and they were not going to let me claim it quietly. Have you ever had your entire past pulled out from under you, like a rug you didn't even know you were still standing on? That night, after the lawyer left me with his business card and a folder I was too afraid to open again, I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay in the back seat of my car staring at the roof, watching shadows shift as headlights passed. My first husband wasn't dead. He had left. He had been alive all these years. Alive while I cried, alive while I remarried. Alive while I grew older believing I had been widowed by tragedy, not abandoned by choice. Sighed, that truth hurts differently. A death is cruel but clean. Disappearance is messy. It leaves questions that rot slowly over time. I kept replaying our last morning together from decades ago. The way he kissed my forehead, the way he said he'd be back by dinner. There had been no drama, no shouting. No sign that he was planning to vanish, and now I was learning he had left because of financial trouble. Fear, cowardice, the lawyer had said gently. Cowardice. That word echoed louder than 47 million ever could. He had been afraid to face debts, so he chose to let me believe he was dead. Ha ha ha, what kind of man does that? And yet, what kind of woman was I that he felt he couldn't tell the truth to? That question hurt more than I expected. I hate admitting that. Even now morning came slowly. I sat up in the driver's seat and rubbed my eyes. I felt older than 73, but beneath the exhaustion something else was forming. Not hope exactly, something sharper, a sense that this was not random. That life had circled back to me for a reason. I picked up the lawyer's card and read his name again. Estate attorney, Portland, probate court, 60 days. That timeline felt urgent, real. I had 60 days to prove who I was, 60 days to reclaim a name I hadn't used in decades. Caldwell, Dorothy May Caldwell. Saying it silently felt strange, like trying on an old coat that still fit but carried memories in its seams. Before calling him back, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the small metal tin box I kept buried at the bottom of one suitcase. I had carried that box through every move of my life but rarely opened it. Inside were pieces of a past I had sealed away. Our marriage certificate dated March 14, 1970, a few faded photographs, and one pressed wildflower folded inside notebook paper. I held it carefully between my fingers. He used to bring me wildflowers from the roadside because we were too broke for real dates. We were young, we were hopeful, we believed love was enough. I had believed that man would grow old beside me. Instead, he grew old somewhere else, built a fortune somewhere else, had a daughter somewhere else. That daughter, the lawyer's words circled back to that detail. She had already been notified. She was not named in the will. That meant something. A father does not forget his child by accident. If he left her nothing, it was deliberate. But deliberate decisions create enemies. I wasn't foolish enough to think this would be easy. $47 million doesn't just transfer quietly, it attracts conflict. Lawyers, accusations, suspicion. I imagined a woman in her 50s hearing about this estate, assuming it would be hers, only to discover an old wife from 50 years ago standing in the way. I could almost feel her anger, and I hadn't even met her. I called the attorney before noon. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I'll do it," I told him. "I'll attend the hearing." He sounded relieved but cautious. He explained that the estate would cover travel and lodging expenses. I wouldn't need to pay out of pocket. That detail alone made my eyes sting. For weeks I had been calculating gas money. Now someone was offering to fly me across the country. Life is strange like that. One minute you're choosing between soup and gasoline, the next you're booking a flight to claim millions. Ha ha ha, it almost felt absurd. He also warned me again, the daughter might contest the will. She could claim her father wasn't mentally sound when he wrote it. She could argue I had somehow influenced him, even if I hadn't seen him in 50 years. The law, he said, often invites creative accusations when large sums are involved. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I understood that kind of creativity. I had lived through a divorce where fairness meant losing everything. I was not naive anymore. If I walked into that courtroom, I would need to be prepared for character attacks. For stories about my marriage from half a century ago twisted into something ugly, that thought unsettled me more than I expected. What if she painted me as cold, controlling? What if Robert had told her things about me in moments of regret or anger? Memory is flexible. Stories change depending on who tells them. I suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. Not because of the money, but because my past was about to be examined by strangers. At 73, I had hoped I was done defending myself. Apparently not. Still, I looked around the inside of my car and felt a quiet firmness grow inside me. I had survived humiliation. I had survived being told I was unwanted. I had survived sleeping in parking lots. If I could survive that, I could survive a courtroom. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth. About reclaiming the narrative of my own life. For decades, I had carried the belief that I had been widowed by tragedy. Now I knew I had been abandoned by fear. That difference mattered. I packed carefully that afternoon. Not much to pack, really. Just the tin box, my documents, and a few clothes that didn't look too worn. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror before starting the engine. Lines around my eyes, silver hair pulled back neatly. Tired, yes. But not broken. I whispered softly, "You are still here." It felt silly talking to myself like that, but sometimes you need to hear it out loud. As I pulled out of the parking lot for what might be the last time as a homeless woman, I didn't feel excitement. I felt resolve, a calm, steady resolve. I didn't know what the daughter would do. I didn't know how ugly this could get. I didn't even fully understand the legal process waiting for me. But I knew one thing clearly. I would not disappear again, not for fear, not for shame, not for anyone's comfort. What I didn't realize yet was that the daughter had already started preparing her move, and she wasn't planning to welcome me gently into her father's fortune. What kind of condition makes a 73-year-old woman leave the only shelter she has and fly across the country? I kept asking myself that as I sat on the plane, hands folded tightly in my lap, staring out the window at clouds that looked softer than my life had felt in months. The conditions sounded simple on paper: appear in probate court within 60 days, confirm my identity, validate the marriage, and formally accept the estate. Simple, but nothing involving $47 million is ever simple. Especially not when there's a daughter who believes it should have been hers. Sigh, the higher the number, the sharper the clause. The lawyer had booked me a small but clean hotel near downtown. When I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me, I just stood there for a moment. A real bed, crisp sheets, a bathroom that didn't require coins or courage. I sat on the edge of the mattress and let out a long breath I didn't know I had been holding. It felt almost wrong to be comfortable again. For weeks, I had trained myself not to expect comfort. And now here I was, staring at a television remote like it was a luxury item. Life changes fast, almost too fast for your heart to keep up. The next morning, I met the estate attorney in his office. Neatly arranged papers. Calm lighting, professional smiles. He explained the process again carefully. I would present my original marriage certificate, confirm dates, provide identification. The court would verify that I was indeed the lawful spouse at the time Robert disappeared. Because no death certificate had ever been properly issued back then, legally, our marriage had never fully dissolved. That technical detail was what made this possible. He had remained my husband in the eyes of the law, even while building a new life somewhere else. That realization sent a strange shiver through me. Legally married for 50 years without knowing it. Ha ha ha, imagine explaining that at a dinner party, but then his tone shifted slightly. "There is another factor you should be aware of," he said. I felt my shoulders tighten. "The daughter?" I asked quietly. He nodded. Her name was Sandra, 51 years old, lived in Seattle, had been involved in her father's life during his final years. She had not been named in the will. Not even partially, that was deliberate, he confirmed. The will had been updated twice and her name was still absent. That kind of omission does not happen by accident, it means he chose. And when someone feels rejected that directly, they rarely respond calmly. I imagined Sandra sitting somewhere with her own lawyer, hearing that everything had been left to a woman she had never met. A woman from 50 years ago. I could almost hear her reaction. Who is she? Why her? Why not me? And honestly, part of me understood the anger. If I had cared for a parent in their final years and been excluded entirely, I might have questioned it too. But questioning is one thing, fighting is another, and I sensed she wasn't the type to let this slide. The attorney explained how probate court works. It is not dramatic like television, it is slow, methodical, documents, testimony, evidence. And if contested, it becomes a legal battlefield disguised as paperwork. Sandra could challenge the will by claiming her father lacked mental capacity. She could attempt to introduce letters or statements suggesting he intended to change it. She could argue emotional manipulation. Even if it sounded absurd, the burden of proof would fall on her, but that doesn't mean the process would be painless. My life could be dissected in that courtroom. My marriage, my character, my past. All of it open for inspection. I nodded slowly as he spoke, absorbing the weight of it. What if she tries to settle? I asked. He leaned back slightly. That is possible. A negotiated settlement often avoids public dispute. Settlement. That word felt dangerous. A part of me whispered, take a portion and walk away quietly, avoid stress, avoid humiliation, but another part of me, deeper and firmer, said no. If Robert chose me deliberately, then altering that choice would erase something important, not the money, the intention, the acknowledgement. He had spent 50 years living with regret. Leaving everything to me was not random. It was confession written in ink. That afternoon, I walked alone through the city streets. Cool air, quiet sidewalks. I kept thinking about identity. Who was I now? Dorothy Whitmore, the divorced woman sleeping in her car. Or Dorothy Caldwell, the legal wife who never stopped being married on paper. Identity feels stable when life is predictable, but when truth shifts, you start questioning everything. Did my second marriage rest on a legal technicality? Was I unknowingly bound to a man who had left me? The law can be strange. It recognizes bonds that the heart has long buried. That night, I took the tin box out again. I laid the marriage certificate flat on the desk. March 14, 1970, 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, a promise. I traced my finger over my younger handwriting. So certain, so hopeful. If I could speak to that girl now, what would I tell her? Maybe I would say this: love does not guarantee courage. Some people run when pressure rises. That does not mean you were unworthy. It means they were afraid. That thought settled in me like a small anchor. For years I had quietly carried the idea that maybe I had not been enough. Now I saw the fuller picture. His departure was about his fear, not my failure. The lawyer called the next morning with an update. Sandra had officially retained counsel. The estate had informed her of my location. She was aware I had arrived in the city. The tone in his voice suggested tension building behind the scenes. I felt my pulse quicken, but not from fear alone. Anticipation. This was the beginning of confrontation. She would not remain silent. She would reach out. I could feel it. People who believe something belongs to them rarely stay quiet when it slips away. And as if the universe wanted to prove that point immediately, my phone buzzed that evening with an unknown number. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. A calm female voice spoke my name clearly. Is this Dorothy? There was no warmth in it, only control. Yes, I replied carefully. This is Sandra Caldwell. She paused just long enough for the name to settle between us. I think we need to talk. Her voice was steady, measured, but beneath it I could hear something tight, something sharp. The kind of tension that hides behind polite words. She suggested a coffee shop the next day. Neutral ground, just a conversation, she said. Ha ha ha, just a conversation about $47 million and 50 years of history. I agreed, not because I trusted her, but because I needed to see her eyes when she spoke. You learn a lot from someone's eyes. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in the hotel room, hands resting in my lap. This was no longer just paperwork. It was personal, a daughter defending what she believed was hers, a wife reclaiming what had been promised decades ago. 2 women connected by the same man, separated by half a century. I felt no hatred toward her, but I knew this would not be gentle, and something told me tomorrow's coffee would not be friendly. Have you ever walked into a room knowing the person waiting for you already decided you're the villain? That's how it felt when I stepped into that coffee shop the next afternoon. It was bright inside, warm lighting, soft music playing, the kind of place people meet for pleasant conversations. Ha, pleasant was not the word that belonged to that table by the window. I saw her immediately, tall. Sharp features, controlled posture. She stood as I approached, not out of kindness but out of habit. She looked at me carefully, almost clinically, like she was studying evidence. Dorothy, she said, no smile, no warmth, just my name. I nodded. Sandra. We sat down for a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was strategic. She was measuring me, my clothes, my posture, my age. I could almost hear her thoughts. This is the woman. This is who he chose. Finally, she folded her hands neatly on the table. I'll be direct, she said. I cared for my father during his final years. I handled his appointments, his medications, his house. I was there, her voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. I nodded slowly. That must have been difficult. I meant it, but she didn't soften. And now, she continued, everything he built is being handed to someone he hasn't seen in 50 years. There it was. The accusation without using the word accusation. I took a slow breath. I didn't know he was alive, I said quietly. I believed he died. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Convenient. That word stung, convenient. As if I had orchestrated decades of grief just to arrive at this moment, I kept my hands steady on the table. I had no contact with him, I repeated. She leaned forward slightly. You expect me to believe he simply remembered you after all that time and decided to leave you everything? I didn't answer immediately, because honestly I had asked myself the same question. Why me, why not her? Why not divide it? But I knew one thing clearly, the will had been updated twice. Deliberate, not accidental. I don't know why he made that choice, I said carefully. But it was his to make. That seemed to irritate her more than anger would have. She exhaled slowly. I think we can resolve this without dragging it through court, she said, and there it was. The pivot, she slid a folded document across the table toward me. A settlement, she explained. You withdraw from the probate claim voluntarily, the estate shifts into redistribution. I file as primary dependent caregiver. You receive compensation for your inconvenience. I stared at the paper but didn't touch it. Compensation, I repeated softly. Yes, a significant amount, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Ha ha ha, comfortably. I had been sleeping in my car 2 weeks ago. Comfortable felt like a foreign country. How much? I asked calmly. She didn't hesitate. 15 million, 15 million. The number sounded enormous, absurd. I imagined my old car filled with stacks of money. I imagined paying off debts, buying a small house, living quietly. It would be more than enough, more than I ever dreamed of having. She watched my face carefully, waiting for a flicker of temptation. I won't lie, it crossed my mind. Of course it did, I'm human, but then something steadied me. This wasn't about need, it was about intention. He chose. And I wasn't going to rewrite that choice because it was uncomfortable. I slid the paper back toward her. No, I said gently. Her jaw tightened almost instantly. The polite mask shifted. You're being unreasonable, she said. You didn't know him, I did. That statement hit differently because she was right in one sense. I didn't know the man he became. I knew the young man he had been, but that didn't erase the marriage, the vows, the legal bond that had never dissolved. He knew both of us, I replied quietly, and he made his decision. The air at the table grew colder. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms now. You're making this harder than it needs to be. There it was again. A subtle warning hidden inside a sentence. I met her gaze directly. I'm simply following the legal process. Her eyes flickered slightly, and for a brief moment I saw something underneath the control, not just anger, fear. She had likely planned her future around this inheritance, imagined it as security, stability, and now I was the unexpected obstacle. We finished our coffee without tasting it. Before standing, she leaned closer and lowered her voice. Court can be messy, she said. Old stories surface, people remember things differently. The implication was clear, character attacks, past distortions. I held her gaze steadily. Then let's bring everything into the light. I left that coffee shop feeling strangely calm, not triumphant, not victorious, just certain. The settlement offer had confirmed what I suspected. She was worried, and worried people take risks. That night back in my hotel room, I double-checked the lock twice before sleeping. I don't know why, instinct maybe. When large sums of money are involved, caution becomes natural. The next afternoon, I returned from a short walk to find something subtle but wrong. My suitcase zipper slightly shifted, the desk drawer not fully closed the way I had left it. It's strange what you notice when you've lived carefully. My stomach tightened, nothing appeared missing. The important documents were locked at the attorney's office, but someone had entered, someone had searched, slowly, professionally. I stood very still in the center of the room, heart beating hard. I immediately called the front desk and requested the electronic key entry log. The manager looked uncomfortable when he confirmed a secondary key card had accessed my room during the afternoon while I was out. No cleaning staff were scheduled. The timestamp was precise. My hands felt cold, but my voice remained steady as I requested a printed copy of the log. Then I called my attorney. He listened carefully and said, "Do not touch anything further, I'll handle this." That was the moment I understood fully. This would not remain polite. This was no longer a disagreement over fairness. It had crossed into intimidation. And if she was willing to cross that line already, I had to assume she was prepared to go further. I sat on the edge of the bed that evening, breathing slowly. Fear tried to creep in, but alongside it came something stronger. Resolve. I had slept in my car and survived humiliation. I was not going to be frightened out of a courtroom. If she wanted a fight, she would have one, legally, publicly. Properly, what I didn't know yet was that this hotel incident was only the first move. and she was already preparing something far more dangerous behind the scenes. Do you know the moment when fear stops being panic and turns into clarity? That's what happened to me after the hotel incident. The manager printed the key log. The timestamp was clear. Someone had entered my room while I was gone. No items were stolen, which somehow made it worse. They weren't looking for jewelry. They were looking for information, for weakness, for something they could use later. I stood there holding that paper, and instead of shaking, I felt steady. Sigh, it's strange how humiliation can toughen you. Once you've slept in your car, a searched hotel room doesn't break you the same way. My attorney reacted quickly. He contacted hotel security, documented everything, and advised me to file a police report. I did, calmly, methodically. The officer who took my statement was polite but practical. "Do you suspect anyone?" he asked. I paused. I didn't say her name directly. I simply said, "There is an ongoing probate dispute involving a significant estate." His eyebrows lifted slightly. That was enough. Money changes how people listen. The next blow came 2 days later. My phone rang while I was reviewing paperwork at the attorney's office. It was my daughter. Her voice sounded tight. "Mom, a man came by the house." My heart dropped. "What man?" I asked slowly. She explained that a well-dressed stranger had introduced himself as someone conducting background research connected to an estate matter. He asked questions about my mental health, my drinking habits, whether I had ever shown signs of confusion. I felt something cold spread through my chest. That wasn't coincidence. That was strategy. He had left a business card behind, a private investigations firm. The same firm Sandra had reportedly retained weeks earlier. The timing wasn't subtle anymore. First my hotel room, now my daughter's home. The message was clear. They were building a case, not a legal one based on facts, but a narrative. The unstable elderly woman, the confused widow resurfacing for money. Ha ha ha, if they only knew how sharp you become when survival depends on it, I reassured my daughter calmly. I told her not to engage further, not to answer questions, not to sign anything. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a moment, not crying, not trembling, just thinking. This wasn't about grief anymore. This was about control. Sandra was trying to weaken my credibility before the hearing. If she couldn't attack the will directly, she would attack me. That evening, I walked alone along the waterfront near the hotel. The air was cool, the water dark and steady. I kept replaying everything in my mind: the settlement offer, the break-in, the investigator visit. These were not emotional reactions, they were calculated steps. I realized something important then. She was scared, truly scared. Confident people don't send private investigators to intimidate elderly women. They rely on law. Fear pushes people into mistakes. And mistakes leave evidence. If you've been listening this far and you're wondering how this ends, I promise you, it gets even more intense. So if stories about strength, justice, and unexpected turns speak to you, take a second to subscribe and stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. The following morning, my attorney received formal notice that Sandra intended to contest the will on grounds of mental incompetence. She claimed her father had been confused in his final years, that he was pressured, that he didn't fully understand the distribution. I almost laughed when I heard it, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. The problem for her was simple. Robert's primary physician had already provided a written statement confirming he was mentally sound when he updated the will. It had been witnessed properly, signed properly, filed properly. Paper leaves footprints. Still, accusations can stain even when they fail. I had to prepare myself for cross-examination, for questions about a marriage from 50 years ago, for someone possibly repeating words he may have said in moments of frustration decades earlier. I won't pretend that didn't frighten me a little. There's something vulnerable about having your character discussed in public at 73. You start wondering what people will believe. You start wondering if dignity can survive scrutiny. 2 nights before the hearing, Sandra called me directly. Her voice had lost its calm politeness. "You're making this very difficult," she said flatly. I answered evenly, "I'm participating in a legal process." She exhaled sharply. "You don't understand what you're risking." That sentence hung between us. Risking what? Reputation, stress. At my age, what else could they take? I had already lost everything once. "I understand enough," I replied quietly. "Do you?" There was a long silence on the line, then she said something that surprised me. "He told me things about you." Ah. There it was, the emotional weapon. "Bring them to court," I said calmly. "Let's hear everything." She didn't respond. She simply hung up. That night I didn't sleep much, not from fear, from anticipation. I kept thinking about Robert's journal entries that the estate attorney had shown me. Words written in his own hand. Regret, apology, memory. Those pages mattered more than money. They proved intention. And intention is powerful in a courtroom. The day before the hearing, my attorney showed me something else. Sandra's legal team had submitted a handwritten letter allegedly written by Robert expressing doubt about his estate plan. At first glance, it looked convincing, emotional, personal, but something felt off. My attorney requested forensic examination before admission into evidence. The judge agreed. I saw Sandra's face across the room when that happened. Just a flicker, but enough. Sometimes you don't win by shouting. You win by staying still while the other person overreaches, and I sensed she had overreached. If that letter wasn't authentic, everything would collapse, not just her argument. Her credibility. As I left the courthouse that afternoon, I felt the weight of what was coming. The hearing would decide everything. $47 million, my name, my past, my dignity. All of it about to be measured by strangers in black robes. But here's the thing, I was no longer the woman crying in a grocery store parking lot. I was standing upright, clear-headed, calm. And if Sandra thought intimidation would make me step back, she had misunderstood me completely. Because what she didn't realize yet was that her strongest piece of evidence was about to become her greatest mistake. Have you ever sat in a room so quiet that you could hear your own heartbeat in your ears? That's how the courtroom felt the morning of the hearing. It wasn't dramatic like television. No shouting, no gasps. Just wood-paneled walls, a judge with tired eyes, and two tables facing forward like chessboards waiting for a move. I sat beside my attorney, hands folded neatly, breathing slow and steady. Across the room, Sandra sat with her lawyer. Perfect posture, controlled expression, but I could see the tension in her jaw. This wasn't just paperwork anymore. This was outcome day. The judge began with formalities. Documents were entered into record: marriage certificate, identification, probate filings, everything neat, everything methodical. My attorney presented the timeline clearly. Marriage in 1970, no official death certificate filed, legal bond technically intact. Estate updated multiple times with my name explicitly stated as sole beneficiary. No ambiguity, no confusion. I felt strange hearing my life summarized like that, reduced to dates and signatures, but law works in ink, not emotion. Then Sandra's attorney stood. Smooth voice, careful words. He spoke about caregiving. About a daughter present in her father's final years, about possible mental decline. That phrase floated in the air like smoke. Possible, not proven, just suggested. He described memory lapses, moments of confusion. I kept my face neutral because suggestion is powerful, it plants seeds. The judge listened without expression. Next came the physician's statement. Dr. Ellen Park, 6 years as Robert's primary doctor. Her written deposition was read into record. Clear, direct, cognitively sound, no signs of dementia, no mental impairment during will revisions. The wording was precise. Medical language doesn't tremble, it doesn't guess, it documents. I saw Sandra's fingers tighten slightly around the edge of the table. Then came the letter. The handwritten one Sandra's team had submitted, the one claiming Robert doubted his estate choice. The judge acknowledged that forensic examination had been requested. The report had arrived that morning. 3 pages, technical details about handwriting patterns, ink dating, stroke pressure. The courtroom grew even quieter as the judge summarized the findings. The letter was not consistent with authenticated samples. The ink composition indicated recent creation. The conclusion was simple. It was not written by Robert. A small sound escaped Sandra's side of the room. Not loud, just a quick intake of breath. Her attorney shifted in his chair. The judge's voice remained even. This document will not be admitted. That was it. Calm, controlled, final, but the impact was enormous. Submitting a forged letter in probate court isn't a minor mistake. It's serious, very serious. My attorney didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He simply nodded slightly, as if confirming something he already knew. That's when I understood the shift. This wasn't about proving my case anymore. It was about credibility, and hers had just cracked. Then came cross-examination. Sandra took the stand. She spoke carefully at first, describing her father's final months, her support, her disappointment. But when questioned about the investigation firm, about the hotel room entry, about the visit to my daughter, her answers became less precise. I'm not sure, I don't recall. That wasn't my instruction. The words sounded rehearsed. Thin, paper-thin. My attorney introduced the hotel keycard log, the police report. The investigator's business registration linking directly to Sandra's contract. He didn't accuse, he asked questions. Calm questions, and the more calmly he asked, the more her composure slipped. I watched her shoulders tighten. Watched her breathing change, watched her control weaken, and then she made the mistake. She turned toward me, not toward the lawyer, not toward the judge, but toward me. She drove him away, she said suddenly. The words weren't part of any question, they just burst out. My father said she was cold, suffocating. The room froze, the judge looked up sharply. That kind of emotional outburst doesn't play well in probate court. It doesn't prove legal grounds, it proves anger. For a brief second the words hit me. Cold, suffocating. Old fears tried to rise, old doubts. Was I too serious, too structured, too firm in my younger years? But then something stronger answered inside me. Even if he had felt that way once, it didn't erase the will he signed decades later. regret doesn't rewrite legal intention, the judge instructed her to confine herself to questions. The silence afterward felt heavy. Sandra sat back down slowly, but the damage was done. Emotion had replaced strategy, and in court that shift matters. After final arguments, the judge requested a brief recess before delivering the ruling. I stepped outside into the hallway, my legs felt steady. My hands were warm, I wasn't shaking, I wasn't crying, I was calm, which surprised me, because weeks earlier I had been sleeping in my car feeling invisible. And now here I was, standing upright in a courthouse, defending my name. That alone felt like a quiet victory. If you've stayed with me through this moment, you understand this wasn't just about money, it was about truth. About refusing to disappear. So stay close, because what the judge said next sealed more than an inheritance, it sealed something far deeper. When we returned to the courtroom, everyone stood as the judge began to speak. His words were slow. Measured, he summarized the uncontested medical testimony, the valid execution of the will, the absence of credible evidence proving incompetence. He referenced the forged letter briefly, without dramatic emphasis, then he said it plainly. The estate would pass to me as written, $47 million. Confirmed. Legal. Final. There was no applause, no celebration, just silence. Sandra remained seated for a moment longer than required. Her attorney whispered something I couldn't hear. I didn't look at her again. I didn't need to, because in that quiet courtroom, something more important than money had happened. I had not been erased, and the story was not over yet. Do you think winning feels loud, like fireworks or cheering or some big dramatic release? It doesn't, not like this. When the judge finished speaking and confirmed that the estate would pass to me exactly as written, the room stayed almost painfully quiet. $47 million. The number floated in the air, but it didn't explode. It settled, heavy, final. I remained seated for a second, just breathing, not smiling, not crying, just absorbing. Sigh. After weeks of tension, the stillness felt unreal. Sandra didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, hands clenched together on the table. Her attorney leaned toward her, speaking in a low voice. I couldn't hear the words, but I could guess. Damage control, because losing the case was one thing, the forged letter was another. That wasn't just emotional desperation, that was a legal problem. A serious one. Outside the courtroom, reporters weren't waiting. This wasn't a public spectacle, but the consequences had already begun, moving quietly behind the scenes. Submitting a forged document into probate proceedings is not a small error you brush off with an apology. It's considered fraud upon the court. My attorney explained that an investigation would likely follow. He said it calmly, without satisfaction. These things take time, he told me. Systems move slowly, but they move. I nodded. I didn't feel revenge. That surprised me a little. After the hotel break-in. After the investigator visiting my daughter, after the threats disguised as politeness, you might expect anger, but mostly I felt tired, and strangely light. The fight was over. I had stood my ground, and I had not crumbled. That mattered more than the bank account. The paperwork took hours. Signatures, verifications, transfers. My full legal name appeared again and again on official forms. Dorothy May Caldwell. I hadn't used that name in decades. Seeing it printed there made something inside me settle. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had abandoned when he disappeared. Not because I wanted to forget him, but because survival required moving forward. Now the circle had closed in the strangest way possible. That evening I returned to the hotel and sat quietly on the bed. The city lights glowed outside the window. My phone buzzed with a message from my daughter. "Is it done?" she asked. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. "Yes," she called immediately. I could hear tears in her voice, the kind you try to hold back but can't. "Mom, this changes everything." I smiled softly. "It changes some things," I corrected her. "Not everything, because here's the truth no one tells you. Money solves practical problems. It does not erase humiliation. It does not rewind decades. It does not repair abandonment. It simply removes certain fears." And after sleeping in my car, removing fear of survival felt significant. But deeper wounds take different medicine. Within days, news of the forged letter spread quietly through legal circles. Sandra's attorney withdrew from representing her. That alone spoke volumes. Lawyers don't step away from easy cases. They step away when risk becomes personal. I heard later that multiple firms declined to take her on after reviewing the forensic findings. Reputation matters in court. Credibility once damaged is hard to rebuild. The district attorney's office opened an inquiry. I was informed but not required to act. I chose not to press emotionally. I simply allowed the process to unfold. Sandra had made choices, and choices have consequences. It wasn't my job to punish her. The system would handle that. A few weeks later, I received confirmation that the funds had been transferred into secure accounts under structured management. Seeing that balance on paper felt surreal. I laughed softly when I first looked at it. Ha ha ha, the same woman who had counted coins for gasoline now reviewing financial portfolios. Life is strange, but perhaps the most unexpected part came from back home. Word travels quickly in smaller communities. My ex-husband heard about the inheritance. Of course he did. Mutual acquaintances love dramatic updates. He called my daughter first, asked careful questions, sounded different, she said, quieter, less certain. I didn't return his call, not out of anger, out of closure. Some chapters don't need revisiting. His laughter in the kitchen months ago echoed faintly in my memory. Nobody needs you at this age. Funny how sentences age poorly. Spring arrived early in the city. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the sidewalks. I found myself walking slowly each morning, breathing deeper. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. The constant tension I had lived under for months began to fade. And in that quiet space, something else surfaced. Gratitude, not for the money itself, but for the strength I discovered inside myself. Because here's what I learned: when everything is stripped away, house, car, marriage, pride, you discover what remains. And what remained in me was stubborn dignity. I did not beg, I did not accept a lesser settlement out of fear. I did not retreat when intimidated, I stood still. And sometimes, standing still is the bravest move you can make. One afternoon, as I was sorting through the final estate documents, the attorney handed me something separate. A sealed envelope, my name written in familiar handwriting. He explained it had been left with instructions, deliver after probate resolution. My fingers trembled slightly as I held it, not from fear. From memory, a letter from Robert. I didn't open it immediately. I placed it carefully inside my purse and walked back to the hotel. Some words deserve quiet when you read them. That night, sitting alone under soft lamplight, I broke the seal, and what he wrote inside that letter changed the meaning of everything that had happened. Have you ever held a letter that felt heavier than it should? That envelope sat in my hands for a long time before I opened it. My name was written in his handwriting, slightly slanted, familiar. My fingers traced over it once, gently, like I was touching something fragile. I wasn't afraid of the money anymore. I wasn't afraid of court, but this was different. This was personal. I finally unfolded the pages and began to read. He started with my name. Dorothy. No formal tone, no distance, just Dorothy. He wrote that leaving was the greatest mistake of his life. That fear had made him choose silence over honesty. He admitted the debt had overwhelmed him, that he felt ashamed, small, incapable of facing me with failure. He said he convinced himself disappearing would protect me from the mess. Ha ha ha, protect me. The irony made me shake my head slowly. There is no protection in abandonment, only confusion. But as I read further, the bitterness softened. He wrote about the years that followed, the rebuilding, the long hours. The investments, the quiet life he created under a different version of his name. He never remarried, he explained. He had relationships, but none lasted. He wrote that he measured every woman against the memory of the girl who believed in him when he had nothing. That line made my chest ache, not because it flattered me, but because it felt honest. Regret has a certain tone, and his words carried it. He admitted he followed my life from a distance at times, through public records. Through mutual acquaintances he cautiously contacted without revealing himself. He knew I had remarried, he knew I had children. He wrote that he did not interrupt because he believed he had lost the right to reappear. Cowardice again. But at least now it was named plainly. I took your choice away from you, he wrote. I decided for both of us, and that is something I can never undo. By the third page my eyes were wet, not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet tears slipping down without effort. All life is complicated. People are complicated. He explained that when his health began to decline, clarity came with it. He reviewed his will twice, deliberately. Each time he left everything to me, not to punish his daughter, not to rewrite history, but because, in his words, you were my first promise and I broke it. This is the only way I know to acknowledge that. That sentence settled deep. Not because it erased the pain of being left, it didn't, but because it acknowledged it. He didn't pretend it hadn't happened. He didn't excuse it. He owned it, and ownership matters. He closed the letter with something simple. I hope you built a beautiful life, and I hope this helps ease the years I made harder. I folded the pages carefully and placed them back into the envelope. Then I sat there for a long time in silence. The city lights outside shimmered softly through the window. $47 million sat in accounts under my name, but in that moment the money felt secondary. What mattered was that the story I carried for 50 years had shifted. I had not been abandoned because I was unworthy. I had been left because he was afraid. That difference changed something inside me. A few weeks later, the legal consequences for Sandra became official. Charges related to the forged letter moved forward. She eventually accepted a plea agreement. Fines, probation, reputation damage. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't contact her. Justice had its own rhythm. I simply stepped back and let the system do what systems do back home. My ex-husband's situation grew quiet. His girlfriend left by the end of winter. Funny how stability fades when financial expectations shift. He never called me directly, and I never reached out. There was nothing left to say. His laughter in the kitchen months earlier felt distant now. Almost small, I decided to stay in the city where the estate had been processed. Something about starting fresh in a place unconnected to humiliation felt right. I found an apartment overlooking a small garden courtyard. Morning light filled the living room in soft gold. I chose furniture slowly, carefully. Not extravagant, just solid, comfortable, mine. For the first time in my life, I decorated a home without considering someone else's preferences. That freedom felt new. Almost strange, I helped my daughter pay off her debts quietly. She resisted at first. Pride runs in families, but I reminded her gently that accepting help isn't weakness. It's balance. I set up funds for my grandchildren's education. I donated anonymously to the church whose parking lot had once sheltered my car. Small acts, grounded acts. Money used thoughtfully feels different than money imagined. Some mornings, I still wake up expecting the hard reality of that car seat. The cold air, the cramped space, then I stretch in a real bed and exhale slowly. Gratitude doesn't shout, it whispers, and I listen. If you're still here with me listening to this story unfold, I want you to know something important. Strength doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like refusing to sign a paper. Sometimes it looks like saying no to 15 million because you value truth more. If stories like this remind you that life can turn unexpectedly, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes the most powerful chapters come after everything falls apart. I kept the letter in the same tin box as the marriage certificate and the pressed wildflower. The past no longer felt like an open wound. It felt like a completed circle, not perfect, but complete. And just when I thought the story had finally settled into peace, one more unexpected moment arrived that reminded me why dignity, not money, was the real inheritance. Do you know what surprised me the most after everything was finished? It wasn't the bank balance, it wasn't the apartment, it wasn't even the letter, it was how quiet my life became. After months of tension, courtrooms, documents, accusations, silence felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. I kept waiting for another phone call, another legal notice, another twist, but none came. The storm had passed. And in the calm, I had to face something deeper than any courtroom battle. Myself one afternoon, a few months after the ruling, I was walking through the small garden courtyard of my new apartment building. The flowers were beginning to bloom. Soft pink, yellow, life returning without asking permission. I sat on a wooden bench and watched a little boy chase a butterfly. I found myself smiling, not because of the money, but because I was there to see it. Months earlier, I had been counting coins in a grocery store parking lot, wondering how long I could keep going. And now here I was, steady, safe, breathing deeply. All life has a strange way of circling back. The unexpected moment came in the form of a letter. Not from a lawyer, not from a court, from Sandra. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity has always been stronger than pride in me. The handwriting was neat, controlled, very much like her. The message was brief. She wrote that the legal consequences had forced her to confront her actions. That grief and expectation had clouded her judgment. That anger had driven her further than she ever intended. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't justify herself. She simply acknowledged that she had crossed lines. I sat at my kitchen table reading it twice. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel bitterness either. I felt understanding, not agreement, but understanding. Losing what you believe is yours can push you into desperation. I knew desperation. I had lived it in my car. Fear makes people small. It makes them reckless. I folded the letter and placed it inside the tin box beside Robert's. Not as a symbol of reconciliation, but as a reminder. Pain repeats itself when we don't face it. Weeks later, I saw Sandra once more by chance. A quiet coffee shop, different from the first. She looked thinner, quieter. She noticed me immediately. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she nodded slightly. I nodded back. No words, no drama, just acknowledgement. Two women tied together by the same complicated man. It was enough. Back home, I began building routines that had nothing to do with courtrooms or inheritance. I enrolled in a painting class. I was terrible at first. My trees looked like broccoli, but I kept going. I joined a small book club. I traveled once just to see the ocean without asking anyone's permission. Freedom at 73 feels different than freedom at 23. It's quieter. More intentional. Sometimes people ask me what I did with the money. They expect extravagant stories. Mansions, cars, jewelry, but that's not who I am. I invested wisely. I secured my family's future. I donated quietly. I built comfort, not spectacle. Wealth is loud when you chase attention. It's peaceful when you chase stability. And what about my ex-husband? He eventually sent a short message through my daughter. Something polite, something almost apologetic. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed closure from him. His laughter in the kitchen that day, "Nobody needs you at this age," had once pierced deeply. Now it felt small. Age does not erase value. It reveals it. If you're listening to this and thinking your life is over because someone walked away, let me tell you something gently but clearly. It is not over. Sometimes the collapse is the doorway. Sometimes humiliation becomes the soil where dignity grows stronger. I thought I was finished at 73. I thought the world had reduced me to a backseat and a blanket, but I was wrong. And I'm grateful I stayed long enough to see that. I keep the tin box in a drawer beside my bed. Marriage certificate, pressed wildflower, Robert's letter, Sandra's letter, not as trophies, not as reminders of money, but as proof that life is layered, messy, painful, and still capable of surprising you. Here's what I know now. Dignity is not given by a husband, not granted by a judge, not measured by a bank account. It's something you carry quietly inside yourself. When everything else falls away, house, car, reputation, if you still stand upright, you still have everything that matters. If this story touched you even a little, if it reminded you that strength can return at any age, subscribe and stay with me. There are more stories like this, stories about loss, courage, and unexpected grace, and before I end, I want to ask you something honestly. If you were sitting in that car at 73 with nothing but a suitcase and fading hope, would you have answered the knock on the window? Because sometimes, that single moment of choosing not to disappear changes everything.